This is one of the most important concepts you can learn as a screenwriter, as a storyteller, not just a screenwriter. Chekhov's gun. So Anton Chekhov was a Russian playwright. He was born in 1860 and he passed away in 1904 from tuberculosis, actually, which is very sad. So he only lived for 44 years. But he was very renowned. He was a very renowned writer in Western culture. And one of the concepts he had was the idea that if you show a gun in the first act, it needs to go off by the final act of your story. So if you think of your story as a line, this is the beginning of your story. This is the end of your story. If you show a gun here, it needs to go off by here. If you show a gun here, it needs to go off by here. You show a gun here, it's got to go off by here. You show a gun here, it's got to go off by here. So in other words, at whatever point in your story you show this gun, by the end of that story, it needs to go off. It needs to be fired. Something has to happen with it. That concept is basically a macro concept of nothing in your story should be extraneous. Like you shouldn't highlight anything in your narrative that is just there for the sake of it being there. Because obviously it misdirects your audience. It makes your audience feel that there is some meaning to that gun or whatever it is you showed, and then it doesn't pay off. And that is not something that is fulfilling for an audience. Obviously, as we can get more technical with storytelling, as you advance as a writer, there are red herrings where you can actually put a gun in your story that doesn't go off, but there's a reason why you did that in order to misdirect the audience about something. So I'll give you an example of the misdirection option. If you go into a room and you see that there's a guy in there and there's a gun on the table by his desk, cut. You then go into another scene where somebody is walking into the house, a woman walks into the house, and then she goes into the room and you know that he has a gun in the room. But when she walks into the room, the gun is not on the table anymore. You're already tense because you're thinking, all right, this dude has a gun. The fact the gun is no longer on the table means he moved it. Is it on him? Is it under the pillow? Is it it's somewhere, and she's now in the room and you do not know what's going to happen. Now, the thing is, if the gun never goes off in that scenario and she manages to leave, you've created a lot of tension. And then he brings the gun out and then he has a look or he says something or whatever, and you realize why he didn't use it. The point is, the gun itself, there is some resolution to that. So it's not necessarily about the gun being fired. It's about there being a reason why that gun was there for the sake of the threat or the tension that you're creating. And then there's a resolution as to why it wasn't used and so on and so forth.
Hey guys, sorry to interrupt the video. I'm sure you're learning a lot, or at least I hope you are. I wanted to give you a quick heads up that I have a free newsletter with tips and advice on screenwriting linked in the description of this video. So make sure that you click on that link, sign up to the newsletter, check your emails, make sure that you click the blue button in the confirmation email to make sure that it goes directly into your inbox, and also add the email to your saved trusted contacts to make sure you do not miss a post. Okay? And I send a post once every week, once every couple of weeks, but it's also got great insight for you on screenwriting. All right, guys, back to the video.
Again, that's a little bit more technical in terms of the storytelling mechanic, but the point is, never put anything in your story that doesn't pay off. Anything. Whether it's a car, a gun, a plane, a book, anything you focus on. But the idea is, and that's the operative word, that is the operative word here, is focus. Because you could go into a scene and just talk about there's a gun rack, there's a rug, there's this, there's that. And in that situation, there's no reason for any of the guns to go off by the end of the story because you didn't focus on the guns that were on the wall or on the gun rack. But if you have a situation that you do focus on the gun or the axe or anything that you have, that is a very different situation. So the key here is the focus. So make sure that you understand that you have the gun and you have focus is the key. That is the main thing. So if you're writing in your script and you have a cut to a gun, or there's a gun on the table, once you do that and you've highlighted that item, at that point you've got to pay it off somehow. Once you've highlighted it and it's not just part of the ensemble in the scene or the background that you're just describing different things, Once you highlight it, then it's got to be paid off. The reason why I say this is a big deal for aspiring and new screenwriters is I cannot tell you how much this rule is broken by new writers. Every writer that I've read who is new and hasn't got experience or is an amateur does things like this. Like you'll see a scene and they're writing, and the reason why is, you're excited, you're writing your script, you put all these interesting ideas in there, and you throw in all these concepts and items, and then by the time you get to the next scene, or 3 scenes down, 4 scenes down, you've actually forgotten what it is that you put in that scene, And then you've got elements of that scene that never pay off. So I'm reading it thinking, okay, I'm hooked on this situation. Yeah, I see this. And I'm like, yeah, but whatever happened to that gun that we saw? Like oh yeah, I remember, yeah, I was going to use it, but then I just thought, and I just was blah, blah, blah. That happens all the time. The main way you can get around that, and this is the reason why I say that, your outlining and planning is so important. Most new screenwriters do not know how to outline. So if you're new, or you don't even outline at all, I was one of those people. So you have no plan, no outline, you haven't really looked at your story structure. 3-act structure is just sort of this vague thing that you sort of know what it is, but you don't really know what it is. So when you have no outline, you have no plan, you don't have a roadmap, you don't know where you're going. So of course you're going to have elements in there that you forget about. Of course you're going to have elements in there that have no through line of thread through your story because you have no outline. You need to have an outline. This is important because your plan is how this is always obeyed. And I tell you that it's the only way. Like, I don't think it's advisable to just think you can handle all the elements in your screenplay and you have no outline, you have no plan, and think that you'll be able to track everything. Because remember, you're tracking multiple characters, multiple threads, depending on how complicated your story is. The Chekhov's gun thing is like, I actually think it's impossible. Like, I've tried to do that when I was, earlier in my career when I wasn't outlining at all and I had no plan. I would always reread my scripts in review and be like, oh, I forgot about that. Or then get lost and be like, okay, I haven't really tracked this element. I need to go back and fix and fix and fix. So what I'm telling you here, this is critical. Every new writer I've read makes this mistake. And the way you avoid this mistake is understanding focus and what you're focusing on, how to write focus, and outlining to make sure that everything you focus on is paid off. And this focus thing, it's a technique in writing. It's like, look, if you're describing a scene, don't draw the reader's attention to something that doesn't matter. That's critical because the director isn't going to do a close-up on a gun that is never going to go off. Because that's essentially what you're doing when you focus on something in a script. It's like a close-up for a director. And imagine if you're watching a film and there's a close-up on an axe on the wall, and then the axe is just never used. If you do that, it's bad because, you've sort of led the audience down one way and it had no reason or meaning. And it actually pulls attention away from other things that you want to focus on. And that's kind of why you don't do something like that, okay? Because you have to be in complete control of the focus of your reader and complete control on the focus of your audience. Very, very, very important concept, a mistake every new writer makes. Everybody. There is no writer I've read that doesn't do this. And listen, Chekhov's gun, it could even be an entire scene could apply to this. I've seen situations where a new writer will write a scene earlier on in the first act or somewhere, and this entire scene just doesn't get paid off. And you're like, wait a minute, so what was the point of that scene with these two characters? Oh, I just wanted to show. I'm like, yeah, but it didn't mean anything to the story. Like, there was no reason for it to. Literally, if you take that scene out, the story doesn't get affected. And that's actually a good test for Chekhov's gun, by the way. If there is any element in your story that if you take that element out, it has absolutely no effect on anything. It makes no impact on the narrative, on the dynamic. You've probably infringed on this rule. And that's actually a fantastic test for something. If you have an element and I say, okay, take that gun out of the scene and out of the movie, does it have any impact on your story? If it doesn't, then there's no reason for it to be there. You've infringed on this. If you wanted it to have a meaning, you've got to figure out that, okay, listen, I don't want the gun to go off, but this is the reason why it's there. And that's where your outlining comes into effect. Because your outlining and your planning is where you would go through that investigation in your narrative to figure out and answer these things. And it's the reason why I said this, the outline and the plan is, for me, 70% of the time. The reason why is that you're doing all of this work in there to make sure that you never have a problem with the Chekhov's gun concept. Feel free to read up on this, guys, because Chekhov's gun is all over the internet. It's a very common thing that writers are taught. You know, I heard about it long before I even became a screenwriter, but it's something people forget. But once you become a screenwriter and you're really writing for film and television, it becomes even more important. You can actually infringe on Chekhov's gun in a novel and get away with it somewhat because it's a novel. It's like 400 pages, 250 pages. You might see something and then you just forget about it. The reader has forgotten that they even read that thing and it just keeps moving and it's all on the page. Not an ideal thing. You should not do that in a play or a novel, trust me, but it is more forgiving. Visual medium, film, not forgiving. Like you do that in a screenplay, especially a screenplay, where somebody is reading that and you're taking an agent or a manager or actor or producer or director through your story as he's reading your script and you put things that don't mean anything in there and you misdirect them. It's the number one way to just confuse a reader. Like the reader just loses direction in your film or your script and that just puts you in a bad position. And it actually looks very, very amateur. So again, that's one of the telltale signs. If you want to look amateur as a writer, start throwing in details without paying them off. That's one of the best ways to just look like an amateur. It's like, okay. And also it ends up creating acts that are extremely bloated. So you can have an act, act one that ends up being 40 pages long. And it's the reason why is that guaranteed, I look at an act that's over long and overstuffed, and I just start picking things off. I'm like, why is this here? Why is that here? Why is this here? Why is this here? Delete, 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 delete. All of those things are Chekhov's gun issues. And you're like, yeah, but this doesn't even, why is this even in the script? You go into act 2 and 3, this is never mentioned again. What was the point? That is one of the best ways of actually looking at it and understanding the mistakes that you're making as a new screenwriter. That being said, guys, you know what? Look, it's not as simple as that when you get more advanced, as I gave you an example before of how you can sort of massage it and manipulate it so that you don't actually pay things off per se, but there's a reason why you didn't pay it off. But for the sake of people who are new, please do not think about it that way yet.